and I'm excited first to welcome my co-host, Sherrie from Storehouse Media Group, and I know you're excited about our guest.
Caroline Alexander. Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, Caroline is a New York Times bestselling author. You're a filmmaker, and you've got a new book coming out on May 14th called Skies of Thunder, right?
I do indeed. This is a book that is about one of the least known theaters and operations of World War II. And yet it is an amazing epic story. It is about the, hold your breath, it will sound very dry at first, the air supply of China during World War II. This was when China had been blockaded by the invading Japanese, and the only way to get materiel and supplies to free China at that time turned out to be by air. And the only problem with that is that the planners in Washington had overlooked the fact that the foothills of the Himalayas lay between northeast India, where the planes would take off from, and southwest China, where they had to deliver the supplies. And this was in an era of very pioneering, still very raw aviation discovery. So, for example, it wasn't even known there was a jet stream. All of that lay ahead, and these young pilots were tasked with flying untested aircraft through what turned out to be the worst weather system in the world over the foothills of the Himalayas.
So let's kind of, how did you come up with this idea to write this book?
Well, I stumbled on it. I mean, almost literally. I was on an assignment for National Geographic magazine in 2010 for a story about tigers. And one of the places I was going to for that was northern Myanmar, known as Burma during the era we're talking about, the World War II campaigns. And this is a very, very wild part of the world, a magnificent part of the world. Very few people go in, fantastic jungle, mountain-ringed valleys, just extraordinary. And it's today one of the largest it is the largest tiger reserve on Earth. But I was struck while I was there that some of the Naga people's huts and little villages, these are the people, indigenous people who live in that part of the world, had these very strange jagged metal fences all around their vegetable plots. And I commented on them, and I was told that they had been cut from the fuselages of the US crashed cargo planes buried in the jungle. And that captured my attention. And when I came back, I found that there were an estimated nearly 600 still undiscovered downed cargo planes forming what was called the aluminum trail that shadowed the flight route of these transports from the era. And that image of the jungle and mountains kind of claiming this whole fleet of aircraft just continued to haunt me. And I just kept kind of digging into it here and there. And then I felt, this is a story, I need to write it.
Yeah, I was going through it, and it's a story of courage, and you had talked about that, and doing this in your investigation, you were unearthing some obscure memoirs and long ignored records, including the miraculous stories of those who survived. And I'm thinking to myself as a writer, like, oh my goodness, what was going through your head when you were discovering all this and reading through all of this information from the past?
One of the things, you'll appreciate this, that makes a writer catch on fire is not just the idea, the concept, or the subject, but when you start seeing the material that you can get your hands into, the voices that you're going to be able to tap into to tell the story for you. And that was very much part of what excited me, is that there were memoirs of pilots, there were memoirs of pilots who bailed out, thousands bailed out. Their engines would fail in these untested C-46s and iced up in these terrible weather conditions. And it was absolutely common to sort of bail out over the Burmese jungle. And then once they're in the jungle, if they, survived that, they then had to get out. And some of these treks out are real stories of survival in and of themselves. So you're right, it's a tale of double courage. It's a tale of the courage required to fly this extremely hazardous route. Many of the men tasked to do it were very young pilots. They weren't even, in some cases, they had only 25 hours of instrument training, which is just like raw amateur. And yet they were thrown into these conditions. So a lot of courage just to do it. And then more courage with the whole decision, do I bail out? You bail out, and then you have to survive the jungle or the mountains and a whole long trek back to safety.
I mean,
Wow.
I just couldn't imagine.
I mean, and lot of once an idea comes, it comes on, and then you start writing, right? And that's what your success as a writer is to go and do it and develop it. Were you most surprised about after starting to continue that research all the way to writing the book? Some really, you uncovered some things you never even thought, even from being horrified by, you talked about, I'm going to search into this, and then you found other things too, I'm sure.
Well, I'd say first of all, I've never been more surprised by what I call the big picture. And what I mean by that is my ignorance about the whole theater, this China, Burma, India theater or CBI theater was profound. And I like history and I am interested in World War II. And I was sort of staggered that I knew and embarrassed that I knew almost nothing about it. So I can say one of the exciting things was that everything was a discovery for me. The other thing, a sort of darker discovery, was the extent to which the American effort to aid China had been the result of a very concerted propaganda campaign. There was a very strong pro-Chinese lobby, largely led in great part by Henry Luce, the media titan who controlled Time Life and also March of Time, which in those days was, great source of the American public's knowledge of news. And he was the child of American missionaries to China. And he literally believed it was America's God-given destiny to be partners with this country that he imagined would become a Christian democratic nation to be a partner with the US. And so all the stories that came out to the public were very carefully curated to imply that Chiang Kai-shek was, fighting the Japanese and so on and so forth.
Wow. I mean, it's quite very, very interesting. And it's something that I did not know. And Sherrie, I'm sure you didn't before.
I didn't.
It's crazy.
I never heard of the hump, which is now called the aluminum trail, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I've never heard of that in the history. And you mentioned Churchill, and I'm thinking, there had to be you're an award-winning historian, but I'm going like, wow, there has to be a lot you needed to know, not just about military, but about aviation. Was that a lot that you had to dig into? Did you have any information going into it to make this accurate?
That's a very astute question. I had the benefit, I think two benefits. One, I actually am afraid of flying. And I think that helped channel the kind of sense of awe for what the pilots went through. But my partner is a former Navy combat pilot who flew low-level reconnaissance over North Vietnam. And his reward for surviving is he's built his own small jet prop plane. And I fly in the right seat of that with him, which means as passenger. And as passenger, not doing anything, but I am up front at least watching how things work and controls work. And I can say that my fear of flying has lessened, but my sense of awe at the multitude of skills that are required to be a true world-class pilot is enhanced. I mean, you have to know about weather. You have to have a real head for maps and directions and just a feel for your aircraft. It isn't just getting in like behind a car and so forth. Multi-dimensional, skill sets. And so that helped guide me in terms of the terminology and the mechanics and the feet. And also I had sounding board to say, you know, how difficult was this really? Is this a tall tale that somebody's told and doesn't make sense? You know, you want to fact check, even pilots' reminiscences can sometimes get exaggerated, and you need to kind of fact check that. So I had a very good sounding board in-house. And but you're right, there was a sort of multitude of avenues of the story that, you know, I had to get under my belt.
A lot of
Yeah,
people do
learn
not.
new stuff.
I was going to say a lot of people don't know about the other allies the United States had during the war. People don't speak about other countries. They speak of Great Britain, but they don't really speak of anyone else. Isn't that true?
It is true. And, you know, we forget a global war, a world war was a global war. And one also appreciates, I mean, in the players in this particular theater, the Chinese Burma India theater, first of all, the initials CBI, which were used to refer to the theater, were used by the airmen to stand for confusion beyond imagination, because they said it was so many allies and so many different voices. But so you had the British in India, you had the American interest in China and nationalist China that was very much unstable and Japanese occupied and not wholly at all controlled by Chiang Kai-shek. So even a multitude of players there. And then you had India itself, as well as the British in India. And then you had in between these Burma, or Myanmar as it is today, that had been occupied by the Japanese, and then later in the war, towards the end of the war, flipped their allegiance to the Allies. And all of these had competing interests, and the Indian Army under British sort of leadership in Burma is one of the great stories also of this theater that is covered by my book.
All right, best place people can go. I know they can get it in independent bookstores. They can get it available on Amazon, all over different places. But is there a place we can check you out as well to purchase the book?
Um, I'm embarrassed to say I'm quite old-fashioned. Best place is probably on my publisher's website, which is Viking Penguin. And obviously Amazon has information, but I don't have a website of my own.
Oh, yeah, you know, you still you're a famous, great writer, so you don't need it, right? They just Google you, right? That's
Well, you probably need everything, but maybe I'll get there, but not quite yet. But thank you for asking.
all right. Thanks again for stopping by. I appreciate it.
It was such an
Thank
honor. Thank you.
Thank
All right.
you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You're listening and watching the Neil Haley Show, and we'll be back in just a moment.